AI, Simulation and the Collapse of Meaning, Why the Future Belongs to the Axis Mundi. Our age has embraced an oblique but pernicious paradox. We stand at the frontier of an unprecedented technical power, artificial intelligence, planetary data architectures, synthetic media, yet the cultural world in which this power necessarily unfolds feels incredibly hollow, exhausted, and curiously unreal. It is as if technological acceleration has failed to expand our imaginative horizons, but collapsed them inward. The boundless promise of infinite possibilities has yielded a world that feels disturbingly one-dimensional. Three thinkers, John Baudrillard, Herbert Marcuse, and Mircea Eliade, each illuminate this paradox from different angles, and their analyses converge on a crucial insight. When a civilization becomes detached from reality and orients itself instead around simulation, comfort, and technical reproduction, it loses its capacity for renewal. The result is not the professed technical liberation, but utter implosion of all structures of meaning. Recent warnings about AI model collapse, the failure of neural networks once they train too long on data generated by other, similar models, are only the newest expression of much older patterns. This collapse is not a technical aberration, but a symptom of a deeper civilizational malaise. In fact, the behavior of AI models mirrors the behavior of human cultures when they become trapped within their own self-referential feedback loops. The Substack article Urban Bugmen and AI Model Collapse, a Unified Theory by Copernican argues that once intelligent systems lose contact with reality, material, ecological, existential, they drift into delusion, and then irrelevance, and then finally extinction. This is not merely a technological problem, it is anthropological, sociological, and spiritual. We will have Baudrillard's theory of hyperreality, Marcuse's diagnosis of one-dimensional society, and the new research on model collapse into one coherent story. Why AI is likely to self-implode, why modern civilization is already exhibiting signs of the same pathology, and why the only durable response may be a return to the Axis Mundi, Eliade's symbol for the point of contact between the human world and the real. Baudrillard, the triumph of the simulacrum. Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation famously argued that modernity does not merely produce images, it produces simulations that replace the real. In hyperreality, images no longer refer to anything outside themselves. Media constructs realities no one can verify, culture becomes self-referential, feeding on its own symbols, and experience becomes pre-formatted by screens and scripts. What Baudrillard could not anticipate, though he gestured toward it in his late work, is that AI would become the ultimate simulacrum engine, capable of absorbing vast quantities of cultural data and spitting out statistically averaged, aesthetically plausible replicas. Synthetic images imitating synthetic images, narratives imitating narratives, a closed loop of signifiers detached from any grounding in the real. This is precisely the mechanism now being documented in AI model collapse. When models are trained on datasets contaminated with too much synthetic content, they degrade rapidly. Marcuse, the one-dimensional human. Herbert Marcuse, in One-Dimensional Man, warned that advanced industrial society creates flattened human beings, individuals incapable of imagining alternatives to the existing order. Instead of critical thinking, people learn adaptive thinking. Instead of transcendent goals, they internalize manufactured desires. The one-dimensional individual is perfectly efficient and perfectly domesticated. But Marcuse's analysis also describes what happens to intelligent systems when they are optimized for performance within narrow parameters. The system becomes efficient, but it also becomes inflexible, non-creative, and unable to transcend its own schemas. The more a mind, human or artificial, trains on its own outputs, the more it forgets the world outside its internal logic. The Substack article's description of urban bugmen, individuals whose worldviews are shaped almost entirely by artificial environments, screen-mediated norms, curated experiences, and academic abstractions, is not a polemic but a sociological observation. People raised in wholly artificial environments develop one-dimensional cognitive maps. They cannot navigate the forest, understand risk, manage conflict, or interpret in unfiltered reality. Their neural models are calibrated to a world of human-generated constructs. This is true to the extent we could say there evolved a new species of man called Homo artificialis, the artificial man. For the first time in history there exists men who can spend their days utterly dislodged from reality. They are clinically insane and function only properly to the extent that the environment they live in is also pathologically insane. Any immediate confrontation with the acuteness of reality will cause them to crash and burn. The two informational structures of the hyperreal and the actual are incompatible to the extreme. Homo artificialis cannot be rewilded, as demonstrated by a discovery program that put city dwellers in nature, where they had to hunt for food and live like a caveman. Many of these people could not handle the immediacy of the natural world. They simply shut down, and beyond the controls of such a program would simply die. Marcuse predicted that technological society would produce this type of Homo artificialis. What he could not know is that AI would mirror this same one-dimensionality, collapsing when its inputs are narrowed to its own outputs. The result is an echo chamber with no external anchor, and echo chambers implode. Unified model collapse, when systems train on themselves. The Urban Buckman's article core argument is simple and profound. Any learning system, human, cultural, or artificial, will eventually degrade if it trains only on content produced by entities of its own class. This unified model collapse theory proposes a universal principle. When an intelligent system loses real-world feedback and trains only on versions of itself, fidelity decays across generations until the system collapses. Examples include AI models trained on AI-generated text become delusional. Mouse Utopia, the Universe 25 experiment, collapses after multiple generations raised in artificial abundance and safety. Urban civilization experienced declining fertility and rising psychological dysfunction as people's life worlds become mediated and synthetic. Human cultures that lose contact with the raw existential conditions that form them, nature, risk, or mythical structure, become decadent and sterile. Baudrillard describes the symbolic mechanism, Marcuse the socio-political mechanism, and the article provides a biological computational mechanism. All three point to the same process: fidelity drift, loss of reality, delusion, collapse. This is not an accident, it is structural. Reality is also self-referential, but has a mechanism that revitalizes each iteration, removing the redundant and the defective. The artificial lacks any such mechanism. Why AI will likely self-implode. Given the mechanism already mentioned, the future of AI is paradoxical. AI looks like an unstoppable force, but only as long as it feeds on real, non-AI generated data. The moment the digital ecosystem becomes saturated with synthetic content, AI begins training on its own reflections, and once the ratio tips too far, model collapse accelerates exponentially. This means that long-term AI is not a self-sustaining intelligence. It is a parasitic intelligence, dependent on the richness of human-generated reality. But modern culture is rapidly replacing the real with the synthetic. This means that while AI becomes more dominant, the data environment that allows it to function becomes simultaneously thinner, more repetitive, and more degraded. Thus the core contradiction is thus: the more AI colonizes culture, the faster the cultural ecosystem degrades and the faster AI collapses. AI, in other words, contains the seeds of its own demise, and so the Ouroboros eats its own tail. Iliad and the Axis Mundi and the return to the real. If Baudrillard exposes the collapse of meaning and Marcuse diagnoses the collapse of human dimensionality, and the article identifies the collapse of informational fidelity, then Mircea Eliade provides the missing remedy. Eliade argued that all traditional societies orient themselves around an Axis Mundi, a symbolic center linking the human world to the transcendent real. This center may be the form of a sacred mountain, a cosmic tree, a temple or altar, a mythic point of origin, or a ritual that binds heaven and earth. Whatever its expression, the Axis Mundi grounds a culture in meaning, order, and a lived connection to the sacred structure of reality. Reality is understood in relation to this fixed center. It unfolds from it. It is therefore not self-referential, and there can be no loss of fidelity, as the measure of reality is unmoving and unchanging. whereas the center of self-referential systems draws ever further inward until it collapses due to the entire lack of information. The Axis Mundi anchors human existence in a reality beyond human fabrication. It prevents cultural systems from becoming self-enclosed, and it stops meaning from dissolving into simulation. What hypermodernity has done and what digitalization has accelerated is the destruction of all Axis Mundi. Everything becomes horizontal, interchangeable, rootless. Meaning collapses into convenience, purpose into entertainment, identity into branding, and circular time into a linear conception. This destruction is precisely what accelerates model collapse in human societies. To prevent a collapse, a system needs real-world feedback, not only synthetic signals, vertical orientation, not closed-loop horizontality, and contact with something beyond itself, not infinite self-referentiality. The Axis Mundi is the archetypical expression of this need. Without it, civilizations become simulations of themselves. A return to the Axis Mundi does not call for a regression into pre-modern life, but for the restoration of a vertical reference point grounded in nature, embodied experience, transcendent meaning, mythic frameworks, real communities, and practices that cultivate genuine contact with reality. The syntheses. A civilization at the edge of its own simulation. When we synthesize all three frameworks, a clear picture emerges. Baudrillard, culture collapses when it loses the real and becomes pure simulation. Mercuse, humans collapse when they become one-dimensional, trained only to operate inside a system's narrow constraints. Unified model collapse theory, intelligent system collapses when they train on data produced only by entities like themselves. And Eliade, cultures survive only when they're grounded in a sacred center, the Axis Mundi, which reconnects them to the real. So the implications are stark. AI is inherently unstable and will eventually degrade unless continuously fed with non-synthetic, reality-grounded data. Modern civilization exhibits the same pathology. Urbanization, screen mediation, algorithmic culture, and synthetic life worlds are already eroding our cognitive fidelity. Rebuilding a cultural Axis Mundi is the only long-term solution not only for human sanity but for technological sanity. A world without transcendence collapses into simulation, and a world made entirely of simulation collapses into noise. We are living through the convergence of all three collapse vectors: technological, cultural, and spiritual. Conclusion. Before the collapse, restore the center. The future is not predetermined, but the logic of informational systems is unforgiving. If we continue to inhabit the world structured by simulation, curated experience, AI-generated content, urban artifice, and the elimination of all existential feedback, then both human society and AI will degrade in tandem. The remedy is not Luddism, but reorientation. To survive the age of intelligent simulation, we need to engage with the natural world in such a way that we have meaningful experiences that ground our being. The experience of the natural world should preferably be ritualized, meaning it should be recurring and full of intent and devotional consideration. One should aim to find in the experience of nature the transcendent sensation of awe, be it for a mountain, tree, or a god. AI will not save us. In fact, it will collapse, and it is not entirely unthinkable that it will take down much of the digitization of modernity. If current trends keep going, then soon nothing will be real on the internet, and many shall leave the simulation simply because people will get bored with AI-generated music and imagery. Civilizations that forget the real die, and civilizations that remember their Axis Mundi endure. And so this introduction to our podcast begins with a warning and an invitation. In the age of infinite simulacra, the only path forward is a return to the center.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear members of our audience, wherever you are. We're very happy that you have tuned in to this 10th episode of Leitstern, our dissident podcast from the Netherlands, specially done in the language of our liberators. We would like to do it in German also, but we think English has more of a reach all over the world. So we do it in English. And we are talking today about artificial intelligence, AI. You can also call it artificial identity. But today we might float between these eyes, the meaning of these eyes. At any rate, that's up to the others in this panel. Since we're three in this panel, or in this group, obviously the first one to comment on this, to have the liberty of commenting on this introduction is Alexander. Alexander, can I give you the floor?
Well, yes, thank you, Hans. And thanks to Sietse also, because I believe that his introduction is quite solid grounding for this topic. It's a classical metapolitical approach, which means activating philosophy and culture historical knowledge to a topic that is of interest now. So we are doing work on metapolitics here, and Sietse has told us the widest implications of AI in our lives. So it's a cultural phenomenon as a mode of thinking even. And he has, of course, made his contribution by mentioning three streams of thought, which he has, I think, very well correlated to each other. And I would like to mention a few other names in this regard. It is not just a show of erudition, it is also because it's important for people to get access to philosophical grounding to understand the phenomenon of artificial intelligence in its widest sense. So I would like to quote the name de Saussure. So that is we can say the person that laid the foundations for modern linguistics. De Saussure, he of course made a distinction between signifiant, so that what means, and signifier, so the thing that indicates the meaning. So this differentiation is of course key to understanding all later interpretations of, let's say, understanding of double layers of meaning, how meanings is constructed, how meanings are derived, and how symbols can be abstracted. This is, of course, very important grounding for people to look at. So much of the work of others later, including some of the people that Sietse has been talking about, has been indirectly or directly influenced by de Saussure. So I would like people to read up on that if they can do a bit of research. What I would like to give is just a short takeaway, and that is that any kind of human expression always involves a kind of abstraction. So language itself already abstracts. Language is able to distance ourselves from reality. And of course, another layer is added to that already by writing down language. So in fact, you can say that the writing system is a derivative of spoken language, and spoken language is a derivative of cognition, and cognition is a derivative of reality, or they should be. And the more derivatives there are, as Sietse pointed out, the bigger is the distance between actual reality. As Ding an sich, we can say, of course, grounding it in German, and our understanding of it. Of course, the abstraction level becomes higher the more technology is involved. So if writing is a form of technology, then digitalization is another form of it. And artificial intelligence is a further abstraction of the digital form. So I would concur with Sietse's findings, but I'd just like to mention this figure. Another figure I want to mention is the French philosopher Foucault. Of course, not a very popular figure in our circles as dissident rightists, but he is somebody that has done a lot of work based on de Saussure. He has understood him quite well and operationalized his ideas in the field of epistemology. So episteme, that's the thinking system, or that what enables thinking. I've done some research on it as part of my doctoral study. So I found his findings very useful. And I think they are very important to understand the shifts that are taking place in epistemology. So Western epistemology It's going through several phases, as Foucault pointed out. We can probably more or less agree with him. So the early modern form prevailing up till about the French Revolution is quite distinct from what he calls the modern form, which is of course layered over that and comes through the Enlightenment. Over that again is postmodernity. So that's another layer added to it. And you can say that we are probably now postmodern. So there is yet another layer, and this, of course, coincides. All of these shifts coincide with political changes, technological changes, advances or regressions, however you might say. So we can also, from this point of view, understand philosophically, by Foucault, how thinking systems and cognition itself is changed in Western societies. A last name I would like to mention in this regard is Durkheim. So that is, of course, the great sociologist. Emil Durkheim, he posed the theory of the social fact. And this is important. I bring it up here because he argues that there are many phenomena in society which can only be understood as independent phenomena. So social events that take place that have their own laws, let's say, like physics has its own laws, also social phenomena have their own laws. And I think this is important to recall because expression and meaning is always formed exactly as social facts. Social facts are in fact only possible through the episteme, and the episteme is only possible through social facts. So the social facts are an expression of the philosophical phenomena that take place within epistemology. This is important because Sietse brought up the social implications of artificial intelligence. And if you look correctly at Durkheim, you can turn it around. You can also say that social phenomena, because they're independent, they also can allow technology, they can also propel technology. So it's not just that technology can propel social facts also can propel technology. And I would make a point here that if we say that our society is currently abstracting itself in all the ways that it's possible to abstract. This means outsourcing literally activities, going from the physical to the mental and to the spiritual. Then, of course, a question can be asked, what is first? Is this techne? Is this technology? Or is this something on a spiritual level? And this is a quite interesting question that has been addressed by somebody of our own circles, who is, of course, Jason Giorgiani, a philosopher from the United States, whose books I also recommend to our audience in this regard, because he makes some quite accurate predictions about shifts in epistemology and the role that artificial intelligence plays in this. His argument is that of course, artificial intelligence can be understood as coming out of an independent phenomenon, techne, an archetype. So an independent force field that would conform in the sociological field to a social fact. To make it less abstract, in fact, what it means is that our culture shifting, of course, into a civilization form. This civilization form is now so far decayed, so far removed from reality, that it becomes necessary to adopt technology. It's not just that, as Giorgiani argues, technology has its own force field, its own independent, let's say, organic function and growth pattern. It is also that this technology is, from my point of view, from the sociological and anthropological point of view, propelled by the social fact of the decay of social life itself. So you can argue that technique and technology, from a telephone to a television to a computer and to artificial intelligence, is in fact a phenomenon of decay. They are like crutches, like a man cannot walk anymore correctly, so he uses a crutch, and finally he uses a wheelchair. and finally he needs a machine to keep him alive, breathing. This brings us, I think, quite close to traditionalist perspectives on AI, because there would be that it is possible to derive such perspectives, but I would leave that for later. This is what I wanted to say as a first reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Sietse, of course, the floor is yours to react to this, or if you want to react later, tell me so.
No, that's fine. I can react. Well, what Alexander said is that society has decayed to the degree that it requires technology. We must, of course, make a distinction between, let's say, very broadly, rural areas and city areas. So the city area, the city area is also what this guy that wrote the article I mentioned in my introduction, Copernican, he says that the city is indeed an artificial ecology, basically. So you could say, just as Alexander just said, that they need technology. I think that in these systems, because we are talking about this Homo artificialis, this artificial man, you could speak of a total integration of the biome or the biosphere in which these people live, and the basic requirements for their existence. So, where a normal person would exist in nature as the given natural environment that exists, that we all have to exist in, he cannot live without that system. This is a simple step of logic. Both need each other, and so the artificial nature of the city and of the bug man, as the writer of the article says, is something that has set itself apart completely and has achieved far more integration and interdependence than organic humans in nature. Nature can exist to a large degree without humans, but the artificial construct that has been created, the matrix, let's say, in these city states, requires constant human input in order to keep the model going for as long as it can, until it gets completely clogged with synthetic information, and then it will collapse. This is what the entire article is about. I think that Alexander is right in saying that it requires technology, but that's also its death knell straight away, because it cannot escape the increasing colonization of artificial information within its boundaries.
Okay, thank you, Sietse. I had a few sort of thoughts about your presentation too. And first of all, is that it seems it is not a recent process, because we're not Marxists, but in Marxism there is this concept of alienation, and that seems to me also to cover many of the phenomena that we have been discussing so far, and that you have been signaled in your article, and it's in the article by Copernican. So that's an older, like mid-19th century phenomenon. And so it has been going on, if I'm correct in saying this, for quite a bit. And also, I would like to point out that sort of it's maybe it's going too far, but at any rate, I've always been interested in the philosophy Guy Debord, the French philosopher from the 1950s and 60s, and one of the great sort of masterminds behind the cultural and intellectual framework of the 1968 rebellion or revolt in France that led to the fall of the color revolution. But also it had a intellectual content. And Debord was the one who said that we're living in a société du spectacle, a society of the spectacle, which is also the same thing that you quote in your from Marcuse and the others. So I think it's a wider phenomenon, And I think what's interesting about De Boer and the movement that he began, that he initiated a group of, well, a current of resistance against what's happening. And that's why we get information, sort of guerrilla communication and ad busters. I don't know if you know the site, Adbusters, and the Canadian group of Yes Men, sort of to create a different reality in order to bring out the fakeness of the existing quote unquote reality. And there's I think the author name of an Italian individual. I don't know if he really lives or he really exists, or it's a group like Luta Blisset, first used in the 1990s in Bologna, and it has been used as a pen name or as a pseudonym for all sorts of people writing on this topic. And there's a whole body of literature about what you can do to subvert the system in which we're living, sort of the unrealistic environment that will lead to our collapse and we're witnessing around us. So if you have anything any of you know about this, please go ahead, and otherwise I'll give the word again directly to Alexander, please.
Well, I think, Hans, you brought up a good perspective here. This is the historical perspective. I already broached a little bit Foucault's theory on the topic, the historical decay, because you can call it a decay of the Western episteme. It shifts. And I think the process that you're talking about, you're saying this is going back quite a long time, but it's reaching extreme forms. I think that's certainly true. So from my perspective, as somebody that studied ancient languages, that means pre-classical languages from the Middle East, the decay process actually started when writing was invented. Writing originally was very concrete. It showed pictures, pictograms. So there was a direct link between observed reality and writing. Now, you could use certain writing forms in a speech variant, but still the picture retained its recognizability. So there was still a link with the old system. So of course, that's the advantage of Chinese. It's the advantage of cuneiform, of Maya, of many other writing systems. They retain some kind of link with let's say what Saussure signifié. So it indicates something that is concrete, that can concretely be realized and found in the real world, that can be observed, that can be heard, that can be felt, that can be eaten, that can be smelled. Of course, it is retained in a quite difficult form, because it is a dual form, that the older writing systems. And I think the mere fact that it retains this ability, that the signifié retains some part of the original form that it refers to, this is very important. The moment that is lost, you already are on a slippery slope, and that slippery slope accelerates. So the alphabetic writing system, in fact, also is a pictogram system. So our A is nothing but the head of a cow. Of course, we invert it. It's two horns and a head. And that comes from the Semitic root alpum. Alpum means a cow or an oxen. So the A, if we flip it upwards, it still retains the picture, but nobody knows this, and nobody is aware of this thing. Of course, what Hans says is true. During even recent times, people, artists especially, have attempted to regain something of reality out of this abstract communication system, which is alphabetic writing, which is digital, and which is now artificial intelligence. People have been playing around with it. Quite genius attempts in our own time has been made by Rob Scholten, which is a Dutch artist. People can look at his paintings. He is trying to filter out realities from very abstract forms, from abstract news, from fake stories, from narratives. And this, of course, has also been one of this mechanism, this artistic mechanism, has also been something that has been used in the hippie movement. There were people that tried to literally overthrow the system, the thinking system, by rebelling artistically against it. And this is not an entirely fictitious rebellion. This rebellion can be more effective probably than any kind of intellectual discourse, because it can reach people on a very direct, let's say almost kinetic form, like music can, like painting can. They can reach levels of understanding that intellectual discourse cannot. But what I also would like to add here, it is that Sietse pointed out a very important remedy. So he calls it the Axis Mundi. Axis Mundi, of course, has been described by him, and people can look it up as well. But I like to make a small note, a side note on this. So the Axis Mundi, which would be a valid counter signature, because the Axis Mundi is, of course, reality grounded. It can be very physical reality grounded. So the most direct Axis Mundi that all of us know is that what is in the title of our program, Leitstern, namely Polaris, the star that never moves, the unmoved mover, that what everything circles around. So that's physically observable, always valid, and it can be used in navigation systems, and it has very literal applications. So there are such points, and the Axis Mundi must be understood in a very concrete way, like Sietse said. So the Axis Mundi could literally be a tree. It could be a totem. It could be a literal place, and it could be a literal person, and it could be a literal event in time, a singularity event. So the Axis Mundi is very important as a phenomenon to understand, because it also offers an artistic dimension. So it has multiple dimensions. It is not only to be understood intellectually, it can also be understood in a very direct, kinetic way. It can be understood in an artistic way, and it can be understood in a religious way. But my side note refers to the vertical axis, because, as Sietse said, it's a vertical phenomenon. And of course, there is an up and there is a down. So in ancient times, all Axis Mundi geared systems of culture, so religions, mythologies, they were what we call with a nice word, anagogic. So that just means teaching people to go upward. Mm-hmm. But of course, there's also the opposite. People tend to forget about it. There's also the catagogic principle. So you can not only lift people up, you can also pull them down through the same axis. And of course, above is heaven and under is hell. And I think that in many respects, our cultural system has degraded to such an extent that now has come to pass, but has been predicted by traditionalists like Guénon, like Evola, an inversion in polarity. So the attraction not of the upward principle, but the downward principle. And I think that this shift has happened over in the course of the 20th century with some antecedents and with some delays in certain fields, but it still can be quite accurately tracked, and it can be accurately shown in many fields of culture. I have done that in my book Sunset. So if people are interested in that, it's a traditional take of the regression of Western civilization from cultural forms to civilizational forms to post-civilizational forms. So catagogic movement here. And I think this catagogic movement is something that is directed as well. So anagogic principle was upheld in schools, it was upheld by the church, it was upheld by the nobility, it was upheld by the priestly class of the European peoples. And now it is the catagogic principle that is upheld by their opposites. So if we had we have a clergy before, now we have an anti-clergy. If we had a nobility before, now we have an anti-nobility. If we had a king before, now we have an anti-king. You can see that. our modern Western civilization has given rise to many antitheses. The theses have been inverted, and they are directing people downward into the hellish realms, as we call it. And that brings us to final point that is related to this pedagogic principle that I wanted to bring up, and that is the idea of democracy. Democracy, of course, is a nice new neologism made by our colleague Professor Dugin, and it means the rule of speed. And this is something that traditionalists will understand very well, because the great teacher of the traditionalist school in the 20th century, René Guénon, he has posed that as time speeds up, also decay processes speed up. So there is a speeding up process at the end of the civilizational cycle, which is also to be seen in the system of Foucault. So Foucault says the European classical medieval episteme takes 1,000 years, then you get the modern episteme of 500 years, then you get the postmodern episteme, which is 50 years. So there's a speeding up. Things are going quicker and quicker. And Alexander Dugin has brought up this principle of democracy. Democracy is in fact an expression of the Guénon principle, namely that we can expect that as the civilizational cycle, or even the cosmological cycle, that's another issue, wind down, decay processes speed up to the point of hallucination. So there's also been other people who have pointed that out. For example, Julius Evola has written about that with regard. He has given a Buddhist take on that. And there have been also artists. I will give you, for example, an example of Henry Miller. He was an American novelist living in Paris. He wrote kind of, people call it pornographic novels, but that's not exactly true. And he describes how the hallucinational character of modern existence in a very sharp and precise way. You can probably say the same thing about Western culture, Western civilization as a whole. So we are in the final end of this spiral. So the speeding up of knowledge decay is only to be expected. So it is the artificial intelligence in this sense is probably the ultimate, or at least penultimate stage of that decay. It is a knowledge system that has inverted itself, that in fact gives only knowledge of knowledge before. So by definition, wrong knowledge, because you cannot build knowledge on an abstraction, as Sietse pointed out. And I give it back to you, Hans.
Thank you, Alexander. I think it might also be good for the audience to notice that in the artistic field, as far as I'm concerned, especially painting, there are some Italian painters from the early 20th century that were masters at depicting the importance of speed. And one of them was Giacomo Balla, very famous Italian painter, and also one of the originators of the aeropittura, the painting from that you see in a cockpit with a pilot in it, and you see you paint it from behind the pilot, so you see the pilot as he looks down on a city, or on that he's going to bomb or whatever, or from between the arms of a parachutist. So this I recognize. Sorry, I advise people to look at Giacomo Balla, 2 L's, and to look at some of the things he made. Very interesting. After having said that, please could you react to Alexander's comments, or would you, Sietse? Please go ahead.
Yes, of course. Well, as Alexander said, is that the Axis Mundi can be used to draw people down. This is, in a sense, true because society has adopted as its axis mundi something that is self-referential. It has adopted the scientific worldview, and all of the grand narratives they believe are scientific in nature. So that's the Big Bang theory and gravity theory and speed of light theory, and these things are all theories. They are unproven ideas which live on paper only. And therefore, what society has become, or what the modern, let's say, Western, for lack of a better word, paradigm, has become an artificial intelligence construct, basically, in that it is self-referential. It is continually feeding itself with its own output. If you look at science, which is basically in a deep crisis, is nothing more than professors quoting each other from their papers and their works. History, for instance, is one of these disciplines that is virtually has become a complete simulacrum. We have professors writing dissertations that are entirely taken from other books from other history professors who are in their turn citing other history professors, and they're running around in circles. This is why David Irving was so successful in that he said, I actually went to the archives to look at source materials. That is how you ground yourself in reality. And yeah, the Axis Mundi can bring people down, but only if they adopt an inverted false Axis Mundi, because a true Axis Mundi would not allow this, I think. That's just as a footnote to Alexander's story, and yeah, for now. So,
Okay. Thank you, Sietse. Would you like to comment on that, Alexander?
Well, I would like to bring up one other aspect. So we have been talking about AI here as a cultural phenomenon or a civilizational phenomenon, and perhaps even an indicator of a larger cosmological process, a decay process. That's, of course, a thesis, but we can see something very interesting that confirms the inversion process here. Because, look, before Christianity, before monotheism took over Europe, so let's say in the Roman times, the Greek times, people, when they look with a Christian perspective at those times before, they always talk about paganism, and they talk about idolatry. Idolatry meaning the worship of a thing, for example, a statue, or temple space, or a holy relic. Now, of course, idolatry has never been away from Europe, but at least Christianity interposed and said, no, we should take a big distance from the divination and the divinity that was ascribed to objects, to places, to people before. We all reserve divinity in Europe for an abstract thing that we cannot see. But with AI, we can see a return to idolatry. So if somebody sits in front of a screen and talks to the screen, what are we supposed to make of that, looking from a cultural historical point of view, a religious point of view? Because we should understand that AI is playing a role in people's life. It's not just information processing on behalf of greater powers that seek to interpose and impose techno-totalitarian systems on us. It is not just Tel Aviv playing around with lots of data. It is not just big banking manipulating people, or Google searching all our personal information and collating it. No, people are interacting with AI, and they're interacting in a form that is taking on the look of what people used to call pagan idolatry. It even reached the point that there are now programs running and available to people in which people can speak to their dead. So they create a program that has all the information concerning a deceased person, copies the voice of the deceased person, and allows a living person to access the memory, so-called activated, of the deceased person. That's in an ancient word, necromancy. It's the calling of the dead. And here I go back to my previous point about inversion. So, from a traditionalist point of view, we are here in a catagogic system, a system that takes us to what is beneath our cultural and civilizational roots, to pre-Christian time, maybe even to pre-pagan time, to the worship of spirits that are assumed to be alive and that take a very concrete hold of people. And that, of course, in the final analysis, can also guide people's lives. People are already being guided by AI advice in their daily life. There are plenty of women with relational problems, and they're going to speak to an AI program. There are plenty of people who are missing a deceased person who are speaking to an AI program. It is very easy to manipulate these programs, of course, by the people that run them. But aside from that, the cultural phenomenon is quite staggering and quite scary from a traditionalist point of view. And here I'd like to bring up a term also brought to us by our good friend Jason Giorgiani, and that's spectrality, the spectrum. Yeah, so a spectre in English, of course, that also means a ghost, spirit. And I think he already touched upon that many years ago. He said the spectral revolution will take place. New forces that before were kept out of public discourse are going to enter public discourse. Force fields that are not human, that are out of the human real, that are out of human comprehension. Of course, in traditionalist terms, those are infra-human. So they are force fields that are lower than the human because they are created on the basis of something, a residue of human knowledge, a residue of human experience and a manipulation thereof, and in an abstract way, so no longer in the control of the human. These are very important phenomena for us to note, to be able to trace this AI phenomenon. I believe that AI, in the final analysis, is part of what Jason Giorgiani called the spectral revolution. And that spectral revolution, I think, is going to reach levels that we might not be prepared to think about now, that still belong to the realm of fantasy, but might come through just under the impetus of it being possible. I mean, it's not inconceivable that large, let's say, control agencies that guide Western civilization are already playing around with such programs, AI programs, to create spectral presences in people's lives. I mean, you don't have to create a Project Bluebeam, but you could, right? You could project the idea of the second coming of Christ, the rebuilding of the third temple, apocalyptic scenes. And I think these can play a political role. They can be manipulated to certain ends. And I think the terrain is being prepared by this AI experience because it literally brings people into a different reality. The AI voices for many people are already more important than personal contacts. People are already by digital life very distant from each other. And I think AI now gives them a way of not communicating with people through digital means, but communicating with higher or lower forces through digital means. That's what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Alexander. It might also be true that since, well, there have been these rumors that in the past, or in the recent past, people like Obama was when he made some public appearances, he was actually a hologram. and some people have seen holograms sort of in other sort of in other settings, like in France, Macron, etc. So this might be a variety of what you just explained. But before we go, well, maybe it's a good moment to reflect on, and of course the one who can do that is Sietse, to reflect on the future, the near future aspects of what we're talking about. How fast are things going to develop? What are we going to see? What are we going to have to deal with in our smaller environment, narrow environment, but also in the broader environment, in a relationship with the state and with the authorities? Do you have any thoughts on that, Sietse?
Yes, I do. Well, I basically laid those thoughts out already in my introduction. In that I think that the whole thing is going to come down. Uh,
When?
when is, of course, that depends on the amount of people that still want to use AI and keep colonizing, so to speak, the public sphere with synthetic information. But this is something that is happening at an incredible rate. There are so many people who have access to AI programs who are generating artificial intelligence texts. There are, images. We are already seeing on national television commercial ads that no longer require any film studio whatsoever. They are completely generated in AI programs. We already have AI programs that create music. You just input your own lyrics and dictate what kind of style you want, and it will make that for you. Um, this is happening to an increasing rate, and it is all sold to people as a gimmick, of course, as things are always sold to the great mass of people, that it is a convenience, it's a goof, it's funny. You can take a picture of a colleague and make him do all kinds of dirty things with other colleagues. These are all within the realm of possibilities. This is also why Denmark, for instance, has granted copyright to every citizen of their own voice and face, because anyone can take your picture and make you say basically anything. Just this afternoon, I saw a commercial by I don't know, it was some sort of investment company that had our prime minister, or step down prime minister Dick Schoof, basically make a commercial for buying some sort of investment fund, which to me seemed highly illegal by taking somebody's face and making him say things that he didn't want to say. But anyway, the pace at which the internet basically uh, is getting polluted is extreme. And with the more and more, of course, synthetic information that is being put in, the worse the outcome is going to be of the AI programs, and it is going to be exponential. And let alone basically the problem of this self-referential loop problem. We are of course running into already into the limits of purely the infrastructure. There simply aren't enough power lines and data centers and cooling waters and raw materials to build the infrastructure that these incredibly energy intensive programs require. You know, just your own discussion with an AI program may not amount to all of that much energy at all. But if you regard that these are billions of interactions each day, then you are talking about amounts of energy which are simply incomprehensible. And I read an MIT technological review just this afternoon, who delved into the energy requirements, and basically the AI requirements of America already exceed the energy total energy capacity of Thailand, for instance. So it's enormous. It is enormous, the amount of energy, and estimates are that a country like America would have to spend 30% of its energy on AI if this would continue. So both ways, even if it just collapses based on infrastructure problems, Otherwise, it's going to collapse on the problem of self-referentiality. And to go back to what Alexander said, is that people are having discussions with their dead and stuff like that. There are already psychiatrists and associations of a psychiatrist who are basically calling out a sort of emergency in that people get stuck in these same self-referential loops with these programs. Because if you are insane or starting to go insane and you say to these programs, I feel like God, this program will enforce you and say that it is an amazing thing that you feel like God. And together we are going to explore why you feel like God. And it doesn't say you are insane, you should seek help. It actually enforces in a self-referential loop again with these people that basically driving them crazy because they are losing all touch with reality. And this is a very dangerous thing. So it's going to collapse, I think, on multiple fronts. Many large companies are abandoning AI because the expenditure is just not worth the gains that you get. And I think, in all earnesty, probably a few years and it'll be over. Now, what happens when it collapses? As I said in my article, I think that it is going to take a lot of the digitization or large parts of the internet with it. Because if the internet has become so polluted with everything fake, people will simply get bored. I mean, AI generated images are only funny for so long. Are people actually wanting to see AI generated movies and listen to AI generated music? I don't think so. Because if I look at my children and their generation, they really don't want to listen to AI music. They think it's fake and stupid, and because it's not made by a human, there's no fun in listening to anything a computer made, obviously. So I think this thing is going to end quite quickly, but it doesn't mean that we are done with our existential questions. We still face enormous existential threats and difficulties as a people, as a nation, as humanity, basically, which AI was never going to solve, and and they haven't receded anywhere further to the horizon. They are only coming closer. So yeah, what comes after is still a mystery, but AI is going to disappear. I personally am convinced of that.
Thank you very much for this take. And maybe it'll go faster than we think, because when I thought about it, it also seems that the judicial system will come down as a result of AI, because proof of what somebody said during a conversation, or what he remarked, or what he has been writing, can be manipulated by the government, and you cannot distinguish it from what's real. So, and when a judge wants to believe an AI generated witness statement or sort of evidence, then that's the end of the judicial system. So that's already there, or right around the corner. Are there any thoughts about this from your side, Alexander, about the speed of collapse?
I believe that AI as such is just a phenomenon. It is a symptom. It's a symptom of a larger problem. And I think it's a symptom of degeneracy. Sietse, of course, pointed out to the psychological, psychiatric implications. And I think the older word for this is not a psychological or not a psychosis, it's possession. So demonic possession. And I think this is not triggered by AI. AI is just tool. It is a facilitator, but it is corresponding to deep crisis inside the people that are falling victim to this psychosis. And of course, possession, it describes very well the precondition of the possession. That means an emptiness. There has to be an empty space that has to be filled in order for there to be another presence taking it over. And I think this is something that all the literature about culture, the culture of the West, the cultural decline of the West, I'm referring to an article by Lush from 1979. He called it the culture of narcissism. So collective narcissism, which is, of course, nothing else but saying a collective form of possession. And I think these processes, they are not just on a private level, they are also have collective effects. I would say the whole COVID episode was certainly a form of mass psychosis, but also a form of possession. And I think this is a very important for people to recall. It is not value-free phenomenon, AI and digital life absorption. They are not morally, ethically neutral. They have an even by the programming itself, they have a certain they skew people to a certain direction, a pedagogic direction, a downward trajectory that they're on. And I think here we go back to Sietze's article. Sietze pointed out that concrete reality is a precondition of human life. Concrete reality and having a very kinetic relation with your environment. So the moment that is left off, a human already is in a danger phase. But if he has a very strong religious framework in which he operates, or he can hold on to the Axis Mundi and in an upward sense, of course, that is then he can handle that. But the moment that both fall away, and this means the touch with kinetic reality and the transcendental reference scheme of tradition, at the moment both fall away, the human is in fact powerless and becomes subject to infrahuman forces. And I think we should not underestimate the impact. So no matter what happens to AI, it may be replaced by a newer form of technology, a newer form of experience, a newer mania. That certainly will be true. But probably the direction of that innovation will be even more negative and even more detrimental to mental health, and definitely fatal for our culture. And I think we are reaching now to that last final point, a point that we have already reached in the COVID time. All of us can recall what happened then. We were on the edge of a real persecution, like a religious persecution that took place like in the Roman times. Like people were persecuted if they didn't offer incense to the emperor, and they were killed in the circuses for this. We were on that point. We were almost at that point that our culture and our civilization was stepping into, I would say, a state of infernal reality. So an hellish state, a state in which the Christians in that time preferred martyrdom. And I think that is not a scenario that is completely excluded now. As long as this technological apparatus hanging over our head remains intact, and as long as this totalitarian control system is not displaced by some kinetic catastrophe, be it an asteroid impact or a nuclear war, whatever, as long as it is there, there is this potential for the establishment of what Dugin predicted, the empire of the Antichrist in the West. I think people should not underestimate that possibility. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Alexander. So at any rate, we're almost at the end of our podcast. But the future doesn't look very encouraging. On the one hand, yes, it's good that the system is collapsing. On the other hand, I also detect in your last analysis some sort of even grimmer predictions of what can expect us, what we can expect, what lies ahead of us. And but I don't know. I think I would concur more with the interview, like with Rob Scholte, the interview you had with him the other day, well, a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I don't recall exactly, in which he said he was very, very optimistic about the future, and he saw everything around him as a sign that things were going to end, and that something else much better was going to be to come in their place. And I think that since we're at the end of a cycle, obviously, there cannot be a new cycle at this moment. Well, a new turn of the cycle. There must begin a new cycle, not a sort of another version of the present cycle in which we're in, because we're already at the end. So we cannot have a new sort of a new beginning of this end. So it's ending, and we're witnessing that all around, because everything that we see around us, whether it's the judicial system or the, as Sietse said, the academic system, everything is in free fall and collapse, and there's little that can be done to restore it back to the standards that we had maybe 100 years ago. So I think I would like to end on a positive note this time. And sorry for saying so, but also because it's better to look at the future with sort of confidence and in the assurance that something better will come our way. May I thank you very much for your contribution, and Sietse, for your wonderful, forceful technical analysis, and Alexander for your very eloquent philosophical elaborations. Thank you very much. This is the last words of episode 10, and we'll hope to see you soon in the new year for episode 11. Thank you very much. Good night.